first, congratulations on releasing your book. It is a very strange time to be releasing a book, and we just discussed how you were supposed to have, well, you had a skylight event, and I, in Los Angeles, thought I would walk and realize that, oh no, we can't do that because everything's virtual. So how is that part going for you?
You know, I miss being in community with people in person, but I also love just being able to do a book tour from home and not travel all over the place. And also you can reach so much more people with the virtual event. So that's been really great.
Absolutely. So, I mean, to dive into the subject matter of your book, I think that, you know, I'm congratulating you on the release of your book. However, I wish you hadn't had to write this book. And yet I wanted to really approach the material. So rather than me explaining it, I'm sure that you have explained this numerous times. If you could just kind of summarize what your book is about, and then we can kind of move into more of the details, not necessarily of the story, but of the book itself.
Well, my book is about intimate violence and taking the shame and stigma out of being a victim and a survivor. I walk the reader through the stages that I went through to get into an abusive relationship, and then how I got out and found my light. And I hope that it helps others find their light too. The book is full of resources about how to stop and spot and prevent intimate partner violence. And it's through the lens of my own experience, which was the former New York State Attorney General, Eric Schneiderman. But it is a book that is unfortunately so resonant for far too many people, because 1 in 4 women and 1 in 10 men will experience some form of intimate partner violence during their lifetimes. And millions of those people experience it before they turn 18 years old. So I really hope that high school students read my book.
Well, what I found really compelling and also very useful about your book, first of all, I should preface it by saying this is not some salacious sort of wild retelling and recounting of your experience. And I think that that was very purposeful. So you have a very judicious way of rolling the story through, and it's interspersed with a lot of really helpful information, resources, statistics, and data that I think everyone who is either fortunate enough to be unfamiliar with intimate violence of any kind would be quite surprised to learn. But I think as a reader who may have experienced it, it is also very reassuring because it makes you not feel alone. And, you know, the way that you chose to do this is quite different from a lot of other books that have come out during Me Too and Time's Up. And I'm assuming that was very purposeful.
Well, I'm curious if I could ask a question back. What is it that feels different for you compared to other books?
Well,
I'm just curious.
Yeah. So, and I've had the occasion to, I was fortunate enough to speak with Drew Dixon, who you actually mention in your book, whose documentary came out about her experience with Russell Simmons having raped her. I also was able to speak with another author, Lacey Crawford, who documented her experience as a much younger girl at age 15 when she was sexually violated in the course of being at boarding school. And there are so many different ways to tell one's own story, and they're as unique as the person. And what I felt was very different about your book, and I'm assuming it's reflective of who you are, is that there was a great deal of, and this is not to say that the others didn't, because they all did, but in their own way, there was a great deal of responsibility that I felt came through, that this was really, it was about you, but it was about the larger issue and the larger concern about how something like this is so prevalent and how it affects so many people, and ways of not blaming yourself, the victim, because you're a very coherent, self-actualized, successful person, and this happened to you. And it's not anyone's fault except for the perpetrator. You know what I mean? So I thought that that was really poignant. And there was something very vulnerable in its restraint, in the restrained way in which you retold the story, that I felt was respectful to yourself. I understand also, you know, you have family and their needs and wants and desires somehow had to be kind of met. And so I felt that it was a really judicious way of relaying something very personal and very emotionally disturbing, even as a reader. So I can only imagine for you as a writer that it must have been quite a task to do that. And you did it so very well.
Thank you. Well, writing the book was a very painful process for me, but it was also very liberating because I emerged stronger than I was before. I emerged with infinite gratitude and love for the friends and colleagues who helped me pick myself up off the floor and keep moving. I was very grateful for the journalists and editors who took such care with my story when it first came out in May 2018. And I wanted to do justice by all of the people in my community, also for other victims and survivors. And it was very important for me to draw readers in with the narrative, but to offer them toolkits that they can then exercise in their own lives, or if they are the friend or loved one of somebody who's in an abusive relationship, to give them information that could help them be a lifeline to that friend or loved one. And in terms of like the tone and the approach, I'm grateful that I'm a writer, and that I also have a background as a documentary filmmaker and as an academic. So the research and reporting to me was very important to help show that my experience is one of many. And as a documentary filmmaker, to be able to add kind of the texture and the layers to help people connect with the story more. It's not just about me. It's through the lens of my personal experience, but it's about a much larger and insidious phenomenon, which is the cycle of violence that we are conditioned to accept from the time that we are born. And the book is ultimately a call to action to chip away at that cycle of violence and chip away at the patriarchy that facilitates it.
And I think you do that very well. And I think that that is very clearly communicated. And it's one of so I have a daughter who's 12. I also grew up in an environment that unfortunately led me to be exposed to a lot of bad behavior. Let's put it that way. My mother had multiple husbands, and two of them, fortunately not my father, but two of them really treated her badly. And in ways that I can relate to, certainly in the retelling of your own story. So of course it struck me personally, but it also struck me in regards to my children, both my son and my daughter, that this is very important information for both of them to have when it's appropriate for them because of their ages, so that they can carry this forward with them into their adult lives. And they can understand not how to, or to recognize the signs, because there isn't really a way to prevent a bad actor from coming into your life, but a way to get away from, hopefully, or to at least recognize the behavior when it's starting to occur. And so I thought that was really important, and that was really different from some of the other stories. And this is also coupled by the fact that you had this external force of sort of a social responsibility concern because of the person who was violating you being someone of such public, and social significance, that it seemed like you had to really struggle with something bigger than yourself. And it felt at moments like this was, I have to choose between me and this other good. And that I thought was also really unique. And you cover it so well in the book. There's a certain level of shocking hypocrisy in your particular story, but I don't think it's that uncommon when it comes, unfortunately, with some of our political figures. But I'm glad you chose you. And I'm sure that all of the other women who came before you and who hopefully will not come after you are also grateful that you answered that other higher call.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, I wasn't prepared for my path to intersect with an abuser. I had never been in an abusive relationship before. I had always thought of myself as somebody who would immediately run if I did find myself in an abusive relationship. But I was not prepared for the grooming and gaslighting and manipulation. And I was also, in retrospect, I realized I was in a vulnerable state with regard to romance when I encountered Eric Schneiderman. I had come off of a string of miscarriages and infertility and cancer and divorce. And even though I was confident and secure in my friendships and in my work, I was weakened with regard to romance. And abusers are very skilled at tapping into your weakness and manipulating them. Abusers are also very skilled at making you feel like they need you. And if you leave them, that you are harming them. They also are very skilled at making you feel like the abuse is specific to you and that you have done something to cause it. You know, the mind is strong and malleable at the same time. And when you have that repetitive messaging coming from somebody you believe is your partner, is your love partner, criticizing your scars, your hair, using racist terminology in the bedroom, you begin to feel like A, you're in hell, and B, what did I do to cause this? So
Sure.
it was very important for me to be candid about what I experienced, even though the details are humiliating. Um, and also to show that, you know, you can get out, you can recover. There are resources and organizations that can help you. And there are resources and organizations that are culturally specific, which I think is very important to point out. While abuse is very common, every victim is unique and it's not one size fits all. So that was very important for me to capture in the book.
You touch on a couple of things that I think are really important to address. The first, and I'm working in no particular order. There is a necessity by abusers to become the voice in their victim's head. And there is a certain control that's exerted when they achieve that, because you, in some ways, enact the abuse upon yourself because it has been repeated and it has been embedded sufficiently that it becomes integrated into your psyche. And I think that's one of the most difficult things to extricate, is to actually remove that voice from inside your head. And I know that you've taken a very progressive path in healing yourself, and hopefully that voice has been excised, although I think there are echoes that will always remain with us, unfortunately. But I'm curious, because I know that you said that you made a list of all of the things that were good in your life before this relationship, and I'm curious that how that helped pull you through it, along with all of your friends and your wonderful support system.
Well, abusers thrive on breaking strong women down. And the domestic violence expert who helped me get out of the relationship and recover, she described it as an unbrainwashing. There was an unbrainwashing that I had to go through because of the negative voice in my head, with all the ways in which he had criticized me. As an example, I have scars that run down my torso from cancer surgery. And in the beginning of the relationship, he would look at my scars as if they were a badge of courage. As time went on and the darkness seeped in, and his drinking increased, and the national spotlight and pressure on him increased, he would look at my scars as if they were ugly, and he wanted me to get plastic surgery, and he wanted me to get a boob job, and so many other ways in which he was demeaning, belittling, and gaslighting me. And I was just very grateful that I had work I could throw myself into. There are so many women who and men who get stuck in abusive relationships because they don't have the resources or the outlet to get out. So I was very grateful for that. And the recovery is ongoing. It takes a lot of hard work. And the most important thing is to focus on yourself, not on your abuser. And I made a list of advice for other people, like, know you're not alone and you're not crazy. Even if your abuser says he is going to get help unless he actually does it. He's not going to change. Tell people you trust and who won't tell anybody else what you are going through. You know, ask for what you need. And then you refer to the list I made for myself of the things that were good in my life. So I made a series of lists. And I actually sobbed as I made these lists because it made me realize how much of myself I had subsumed into his abuse, how much of my life I had put away. I made a list of the qualities I wanted in a partner that I would want for somebody I loved. I made a list of the things that were better in my life before I met him. I made a list of all the things that I wanted to do without him.
Mhm.
And like for the qualities I would want in a partner, it's, you know, somebody who makes me feel good about myself, somebody who accepts me as I am. When it came to things that that he prevented me from doing, it was, you know, spending more time with my friends. It was, you know, going out and dancing, traveling, and visiting family. So, you know, so many ways in which we really hide ourselves away because we give ourselves over to the partner. So the book is a call to action for everyone to, you know, be their best selves and be with people who allow them to be their best selves.
Mhm. It's interesting because it seems so fundamental. You know, when you say things like, I want to be able to spend time with my friends, I want someone who makes me feel good about myself. And I think that not only really speaks to how terrible things become inside an abusive relationship, because it becomes a universe unto itself. And it's very difficult to see anything beyond it because it thrives on one being annexed into it, right? It can only survive as an ecosystem if both parties are really present. So I'm glad that you point out all of those things on the list, because I think for other people maybe who haven't had experience with this, they won't understand that something that sounds so simple can be so inexplicably difficult to achieve when you're in that type of a relationship. You know, one of the other things that of course spoke to me, I'm a woman of color. You're a woman of color, you're Sri Lankan descent, American, of course, but there's another dynamic that I think really needs to be a little bit further examined, which is this racial dynamic. Because when you're already in a power structure in a relationship and you have an abusive power structure, and then you start to bring these other elements into it, it's not just misogyny, it's not just abuse, but there's also this other, you know, sort of colonialist attitude that comes into it that was very overt in your particular case.
Mm.
That's another kind of challenge. And I know I unfortunately got to witness that with one of my mother's spouses. So I can understand, and I really felt for you. I felt for you in every way, but in that particular instance, that is just, it's like that one extra layer of misery. And I'm just worried that it happened. But I also want to say you know, there's a shame humiliation portion of this that doesn't belong to the victim, right? It doesn't really belong to you. It's put on you, but it belongs to the perpetrator. It belongs to the abuser. And a lot of what you do in this book is remind us that this is really not your shame. This is what was done to you. You're not deserving of this. So there's something very therapeutic also in reading your book, I think, for
I'm
me.
so glad.
Yeah. But can you tell me, I mean, that must not have been a good, you know, that's another, you know, it was like a bonus round. It was a nasty cherry to have this racial element that also is going on.
I mean, it was flat out racism in the sexual context. The way in which he would slap me until I agreed to call him master. And I was his slave. I was his brown girl that he had found from far away to bring back to America. It was the cognitive dissonance between his public self, which was a feminist, an ally of communities of color, a progressive. Eventually, he would become an ally of the Me Too movement, but privately he abused me and he was racist. So That cognitive dissonance is one that is part of many abusers' makeup. There's that bifurcation, the self that they present publicly and the way that they behave privately. And because they are entitled, they think they can get away with it. But what's important to talk about there is, he fooled a lot of people, but he also had a lot of people shielding him who enabled him to fool people. He was surrounded by supposed feminists. He was surrounded by supposed spiritual teachers. So it made it much easier for me to get duped when I had all these people encouraging me to get into the relationship and saying that he was a good guy. And the cults of personality that form around powerful, rich, or talented abusers are damaging to the people who are not only in those cults, but also to society. And I feel like one of the big challenges for us moving forward, and it's a collective project, is to unpack and unravel those cults of personality, because the abusers stand on pedestals and those pedestals need to be taken away.
Absolutely. It's interesting because also you mentioned there are a lot of names mentioned in your book of men who have since been, for lack of a better term, outed for their really I don't know a big enough word for their behavior, their awful, horrible, despicable behavior. And it seems that they do sort of run in a pack, and it does seem that they have an entire structure around them, and we saw that in entertainment, we've seen that in politics, and we're starting to see that it really is just kind of a pervasive problem of propping up powerful people. Now, the really amazing thing is that throughout this entire experience, you're still a productive, working artist and producer. I mean, your career is still ongoing. I can't imagine how you're juggling these things. I mean, you're interjecting, and I'm doing the Woman of the Year event, and I'm going to this award ceremony and so forth. How do you have the bandwidth to do both of those things simultaneously?
Well, that is a trait that I acquired from the time I was a child, because I was a child who grew up in a home with horrific domestic violence, but I still had to go to school. I still had to show up and keep appearances. So that ability to compartmentalize was something that I learned from a very young age. But also I had to work to make a living.
Right.
Eric Schneiderman was not supporting me. So I was very utilitarian about it, and I always have been. For me, it's always been important to be able to, I consider myself an artist and a writer, but it's also been very important for me to, figure out what I need to do to support the thing that I want to do. And the thing that I want to do is to write, and my love of theater, the producing films and events is what really sustains me economically. So I kept showing up.
It's remarkable. I'm very impressed because it speaks not only to your capability, but also to, your strength. And I think that also, I'm sure, added to the surprise for some people. How can this be? Tanya's doing all of these wonderful things. How could this other thing be happening simultaneously? And I think it's important for people to recognize that they do happen simultaneously. And I also, I mourn the things that you could have done had this not been going on in the background. Clearly, you were spinning a lot of plates. Who knows what other, wonderful, beautiful things could have come out of that period. Not to say that you aren't going to continue, because obviously you are. You've done this. And so your path has shifted where it needs to. But I think that there's something that people need to also acknowledge, which is that we as a community have also been robbed. We've been robbed of the fruits of your artistry and your output. And so it goes in the community of whatever people. And that's I don't know, that for some reason that just strikes me as something we need to call out.
Well, I am fortunate that I was able to get out after about a year. Think of all the women whose careers have been stopped because they are stuck in abusive relationships. Yeah. When you read the stories about predators like Les Moonves and Charlie Rose and Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby, and you think of all the trauma and harm that they inflicted, and how many great artists and directors and producers and businesswomen might have emerged if they hadn't had their paths intersect with those abusers. So as I said, I emerged from the writing of the book with immense gratitude and stronger than before. And one of the reasons I wrote the book is I want people who are in abusive relationships to immediately figure out a way to get out of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking, I have a very dear friend who survived a very abusive relationship, but she said that the first signal she got, intellectual or mental, it was in her body. Her body didn't feel right. And so she credited her abuser really deftly turning off her red flag alert. And that's the part of the whole gaslighting process that goes along with it. But your body had been through a lot already. And I wonder if perhaps, you say you weren't in a great space from a romantic perspective, but I think also having had to endure all of these physical things, that does also put us in a vulnerable space in a way that I don't even know if we can measure. And I do think that predators, it's a little bit of a blood in the water thing. You were a very shiny, wonderful, prey to go after. You were that shiny, sparkling thing for the AG to look at. So I'm that your book really does an excellent job of covering every single base. But what I would like to know is, what are you doing now? I mean, obviously you've got this book coming out. You have other projects that you're doing. I'd like to know about Tanya today. So if you would like to share that with some of us anyway.
Well, this is week 1 of book launch, and I'm really happy to be having this conversation with you for the Woolfer. I've been fortunate to meet Nina Larez Collins. We actually met in Portland, Oregon, which is where I did most of the writing of the book, through a mutual friend. And most recently, I was very fortunate to work on many projects that were about joy. And when you work with joyful people on joyful projects, it's easier to experience joy. So I was part of the team that worked on Joy to the Polls, which was an initiative of election defenders, and it was to make voting a celebration. And that was a joyful project. I've been involved with the Wide Awakes, which is very much about infinite joy and civic joy. And I'm doing some conversations for Women's History Month with the Wide Awakes and Four Freedoms next week. And I just finished working on a series of videos to celebrate the premiere of PBS's The Black Church series by Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. That aired last week, just last week. So there's some wonderful, wonderful videos I got to make with John Legend and Tasha Cobbs Leonard and Erica Campbell and Fred Hammond, and waking up every morning and putting on gospel music. It's been a game changer for me. So I've been very fortunate to work on those projects. And then now it's obviously the rush of the book launch. But the book has also been optioned by ABC Signature Disney Television, and it's being developed into a series. So that is going to be, that is kicking into gear right now. Joanna Coles is executive producing, and I had no intention of the book being turned into a series. I'm very grateful that it is, so that the message can reach an even larger audience.
Absolutely. Congratulations on that, and all of your other projects. It sounds amazing. So I'm going to be logging on to PBS so I can catch those myself. And I guess I should say, to everyone who's listening or watching, Tanya's website is Tanya Turns Up, which I love. I think that because you said it's because you turn up. You show up for people. So everyone should please log on to her website. Please pick up a copy. of Assume Nothing. It is really masterful and very meaningful, and hopefully you will share it with a lot of other people in your life. And I guess thank you so much for your time. Thank you for indulging us in this conversation. It really was wonderful. And I hope to hear a lot more from you, and I will keep my eye out for the series.
Great. Thank you so much, Tulani, and have a great weekend, and hi to all the Woolfers.
Thank you, Tanya.